Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Hello, welcome back to the show. This is the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, and if you're learning a foreign language, you're in the right place. And also cool to see people joining me on Periscope as well. I've started doing some Periscope. For those of you who don't know, it's an app where you can watch live video streaming, and so a few times a week, I jump on Periscope and I do a live broadcast. I talk about some aspect of language learning. It's kind of like the podcast, really. If you like the podcast, you're going to love this. It's just a way for us to kind of hang out online, and you can ask me questions, and I can show you where I am and what I'm doing. It's really cool. So make sure you download the Periscope app on your phone and search for Olly Richards. Once you've got it, and you'll find me there, and you'll get notified anytime I jump on and do a new broadcast. I'd love to see you there. Now, let's jump into today's question from Greg.
Hello, Olly. This is Greg from Chicago. This is my second time asking a question. I recently took the DELE exam. You're probably familiar with it. I'm studying Spanish. It's called the Diploma de Español como Lengua Extranjera, which is a standardized test. I took the B2 level and am currently awaiting my results. Wish me well. But regardless of whether I passed, I know that I will learn something about my level based on the scores that I get. So here's my question. Aside from taking a formal exam like this, what advice do you have about ongoing self-assessment? That is, how do you keep a handle on where your current level is and what your strengths and weaknesses are as you progress in the language? Thank you so much.
Okay, Greg, thanks so much for your question. Great to hear from you again, and a cool question too. You know, it's one of the questions that I get asked most often. How do I know if I'm making progress? How do I know if I'm progressing in my language? But people don't have there's no kind of obvious objective criteria to measure your progress against. There's so many different variables. Now, it's all very well if you're doing an exam like the DELE, for example, which is the Spanish proficiency exam, because you've got these kind of strict criteria and you either pass them or you don't. So you've got a very easy way of measuring how well you're doing. But I think most of us probably aren't taking exams in the language we're learning. So how do we measure our progress? And how do we measure our progress? And the implication of measuring your progress, I think, is staying motivated. Because if you're not making any progress, you're not going to be very motivated to carry on, are you? And vice versa. So it is kind of important to have some idea of how to measure your progress. And the most important thing here is any measure of progress has to be done against a goal. But the problem is that most of us don't have very well-defined goals. I was just chatting to someone this morning, actually, who when we were talking about the fact that he always articulated his goal as become fluent in Spanish or learn Spanish. And he was saying how he went through one of my most recent course called Time Control, which is a time management and productivity system for language learning. And you can find more information about that at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/time control. And he was saying how he went through the first module of that course where we talk all about goals and goal setting, and he realized that all along he'd been saying I was just aiming for fluency. But in fact, there are far smarter ways of making progress, and it comes down to defining short-term goals rather than the kind of holy grail of fluency, right? And so these goals can be anything. They can be, for example, I want to be able to speak with my parents-in-law. I want to be able to read a book. I want to be able just to enjoy a conversation with a friend. Whatever it may be, and there's loads of different goals you might have. But that's how you measure your progress fundamentally. It's against the short-term goal and the thing that you're aiming for in the short term. And it's not helpful to assess yourself against fluency, because if you're measuring yourself and your progress against a C2 level, which is kind of the highest level that there is for a language learner, then there are always going to be so many things you don't know, and your progress is going to seem like a huge, long, insurmountable mountain. But that kind of measure of progress just isn't necessary, because it doesn't accurately reflect our goals. And we don't need to reach a C2 level in the language we're learning, unless we really, really want to. It's absolutely not necessary. And so, we've got to have a short-term goal in order to know whether we're progressing against that goal. Now, for me personally, this is something I'm not particularly good at. I don't really track my progress because I think I tend to do it intuitively. My goal in most of the languages that I learn is simply conversational fluency. I want to be able to enjoy having conversations in the language. And so my approach to doing this is to measuring my progress and knowing whether I am making progress is usually to go by topics or situations. So as I'm making progress in language, I think, right, I want to be able to talk about the weather, or I want to be able to talk about my family, or I want to be able to talk about language learning. And so I'll tend to focus on one topic or one situation. A situation could be meeting someone for the first time, or ordering something in a restaurant, or opening a bank account, or whatever it may be. I'll tend to focus on one topic at a time until I can talk confidently about that topic, or until I know all of the main vocabulary about that topic. And so that's how I tend to measure my progress. So if you're learning Italian at the moment, and your kind of short-term goal is to be able to order food in a restaurant when you visit Italy next year, you've got a very clear goal, and you've got a very easy way to measure your progress as well. You can quite easily define all the stuff you need to know to talk about that topic. And you can measure whether you know those words and phrases or not. So that's how I tend to think about it. It's a topic and situation-based approach. There are other little kind of hacks, if you like, that you can use to measure your progress. I mean, one thing I do, for example, is I like to use flashcards, and I organize vocabulary that I'm learning in decks of flashcards. And the reason I do that is because it helps me to see, like, once I know all of the words in a particular deck, that gives me a sense of completion and a sense of progress. So that helps me to stay motivated, because I can see, right, I had 50 words in that deck, and now I know all of them. And that's cool, and that shows you that you've been making progress. Again, I tend to organize it. Well, I organize flashcard decks in lots of different ways, but you could organize it by topic and do it that way. The other thing that I always do is make sure to have regular conversations, because speaking is my aim, it's what I want. And generally, if conversations are becoming easier, if I can talk about a wider variety of topics, then I know that I'm making progress. And again, it's not a very scientific answer for you, Greg, but that's intuitively how I go about doing it. So I hope that's helpful. If you'd like to ask me a question, please do. You can do it right from your smartphone as you're listening to this, or from the computer. Simply go over to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and you can leave me a voicemail question. You can also get all the things I mentioned today in today's episode in the show notes, which are at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 60. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And I found a really cool little article, and it's on a blog called Multilingual Living, which is a big blog all about, believe it or not, multilingual living. And it's actually, when I found it, I realized it's written by my friend Donovan, who runs Mezzofanti Guild and Talk in Arabic. Anyway, he's written this article called Foreign Languages, Tips for Keeping Track of Where You're At. And he's got this cool system where he talks about how to measure your progress from one day to the next. So definitely check that out. Again, I'll put a link to this in the show notes, iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 60. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. Storylearning.com/courses.